My name is Ellen. I am 34 years old. I am single mom of a 3-year-old cute boy, and I live in Denver, Colorado. I will always remember that day, November 18, 2022. I was working as a newscaster for Sky News at the height of my career. The event was a celebration of both my birthday and the success of a television series we had recently finished. With my friends and coworkers present, I felt successful and surrounded by people who valued my efforts. However, something felt off as the night wore on. I started to experience severe stomach cramps that left me double over in agony, followed by bleeding, as if an enormous sickness were coming up on me. Only a few months prior, I had been diagnosed with what they believed to be a stomach ulcer, but I had refused the medicine. I'd persuaded myself that I could manage it and recover on my own. This pain, however, was distinct. I realized something was really wrong because it was much worse than I had anticipated. I drove home after excused myself from the gathering. I was just concerned with arriving to my front door during the drive, which was a blur. When I eventually arrived, I passed out, inside splattering blood all over the floor. My intestinal tract had actually burst, which was a much more serious situation than anyone had thought. I didn't realize the seriousness of the problem at the time, but doctors would later diagnose me with ulcerative colitis. My companion hurried me to the emergency department after I called for assistance. However, they refused to even check me in when we got there. The AIDS epidemic was having a devastating effect on the healthcare sector in the mid-1980s. They refused to treat me because they believed I had the illness. I was abandoned in a corner, suffering and losing blood. As I drifted in and out of awareness, time seemed to blend together, with minutes feeling like hours. Then I was discovered by a nurse, who that evening became my guardian angel. She took charge right away, hurrying me into the emergency room and making sure the physician started treating me. I was critically ill by the time I was wheeled into the surgery room. The blood loss had caused my veins to collapse, and they were barely able to keep the IVs installed. An incomprehensible thing started to happen while I lay there, fading between life and death. A tunnel that resembled a bullseye and was whirling and rotating materialized in front of me. Everything I had ever known seemed to be melting away, trapping me in this whirling whirlpool. Even though I had no idea what was going on, it felt incredibly real. The doctors working in slow motion were visible to me. As they attempted to place an IV in my lower back, they were turning me over. As I observed them at work, everything was blurry but incredibly clear. Then everything suddenly fell apart. My mind and body seemed to be totally out of sync. I was no longer with those folks in that room. My worldly form no longer held me. I was drawn into a tunnel after drifting into the dark. It guided me ahead by pulling at my solar plexus. Yet it wasn't a bodily pull. Through this tube, I had the impression that I was being vacuumed in the direction of light. Then I saw them. Faces, acquaintances, and some I had forgotten for a long time, family as well as even deceased distant relatives. With smiles on their faces, they welcomed me as if I had come home. After that, I ran into Mrs. Bellamy, my third-grade teacher. However, she didn't appear like the person I knew. I had never seen her before, but she looked younger, more lively, and more alive. I thought it was strange, but I didn't question it. I just took it. Something remarkable started to happen as I proceeded through the tunnel. I started to notice numbers, symbols, and equations, patterns, mathematical formulas, and even ideas like complex equations and quantum physics that I had never comprehended before. I had always been artistic and creative, so these difficult ideas looked completely alien to me. However, I now comprehended them as though they were instinctive. I was taking in things that I didn't even know I could understand before. Then I came to a tree. It was lovely. The leaves glistened with an ethereal brilliance, and the branches reached high. It seemed as though I was momentarily suspended, yet this tree was unlike any other I had ever seen. Here, I felt calm and safe. Suddenly, I caught sight of him, Jesus. He wasn't the bearded man in white robes who I had grown up with. He was unique, though, I could never have imagined the brightness of his presence. He was standing next to me, beaming with light and warmth. And even though he didn't say anything, I could feel his words in my spirit, as though I were the most significant individual in the universe. His presence surrounded me like a blanket of love. "Now, do you understand?" Jesus questioned in a voice that simultaneously appeared to emanate from everywhere and nowhere. His comments were like a discussion without words. They went beyond simply touching my ears and into the core of who I am. "Every second of your life counts. Every decision and action has an eternal impact. You are a part of everything." He guided me through a review of my life, and I watched. However, this was more than a summary of what I had done. It was a thorough comprehension of the galaxy. I looked down at the Earth, which was teeming with life, and I saw everything: conflicts, pain, brutality, and good deeds. Ordinary people performing exceptional feats include teachers, firefighters, and neighbors. Jesus used the world to demonstrate to me how love, even in tiny amounts, had the capacity to transform everything. Then the decision-making moment arrived. "Want to come back?" Jesus asked in a stern but gentle tone, "Would you like to return to the living world with this understanding of truth and love?" The next thing I saw was a picture of my life once I got back. I envisioned myself traveling the world, writing books, giving talks at conferences, and sharing my experiences with others. I also realized how long and challenging my recuperation would be. The suffering, the difficulties, and the loneliness. Even so, I was aware that I had a goal. I decided to go back in spite of the difficulties. Everything jerked the instant I made my decision. My physical form, together with my consciousness, abruptly returned. I awoke. It had been 3.5 weeks. The fact that I had survived shocked the doctors. However, I had changed by the time I returned. My illness and the negative effects of the drugs I had been taking were among the things I was aware of. My senses had been sharpened. I started seeing things that I was unable to describe. In the hospital, I saw spirits, still in their hospital gowns. Deceased patients were seen strolling the corridors. I was scared at first. However, it dawned on me that they were anticipating something. They awaited resolution. When I told my doctors what I had discovered, they wrote me off as having hallucinations. In actuality, I had returned with a present, but no one with whom to enjoy it. I had changed, but the world hadn't. The most significant thing I took away from that experience was that life isn't about avoiding suffering. It's about loving through it, developing through it, and realizing that love always wins out, no matter how hopeless things appear. I will never forget an amazing event that occurred months after I was released from the hospital. I went to the physician who had treated me and I said, "I'm walking with absolute resolve." Something inside of me clicked in that instant, and I was resolved to dispel anyone's concerns about my will to live. When he saw me walking once more, the doctor who had doubted my recuperation was taken aback. He was clearly stunned by the amazing change that was taking place in front of him. My body wasn't the only thing recovering. Mentally, emotionally, and spiritually, everything was shifting. I was changing. My emotional and spiritual metamorphosis was much more significant than my miraculous physical recovery. I recall feeling like I was being reborn as I left that hospital. However, I didn't anticipate that my relationships and my entire world would undergo a permanent transformation. People began to distance themselves from me very quickly. Friends who used to be close were unable to comprehend how I had changed. What little family I still had just stopped talking to me. Survivors of near-death frequently experience this. Our loved ones find it difficult to accept the new us. Some people find what we've witnessed and learned to be too much to bear. But I made a decision rather than give in to the agony. I went with thankfulness. A second chance at life had been granted to me. It wouldn't be wasted. I started a daily gratitude stroll in which I paused to notice the beauty all around me. I was determined not to take anything for granted again after all the time I had lost, particularly the time I had lost when I was blind. I started to value each day and lived each one as if it were my last. Something remarkable started to happen while I was recovering in the hospital. My psychic abilities began to show. Spirits started showing up to me, and they seemed to be attempting to speak to me silently through my thoughts. Bathed in light, they would appear at the foot of my bed. I could hear them intuitively via my head and spirit, as though the world had opened up. Although I couldn't hear their voices, I comprehended things fully without the use of words. I wasn't sure how to process it at first. I had never experienced anything like these before. However, as time went on, I realized that a deeper force, a loving presence, was guiding me in addition to these spirits. And one evening, as I lay in bed, I experienced a profound sense of calm. I felt as though I was being softly supported and held. Jesus was not physically present when I felt him, but rather as an energy, a warm, pure light that gave me an unwavering sense of unconditional love. It was a knowledge rather than a vision. I understood that this encounter, which served as a reminder of the love and tranquility that transcended this world, was a gift from God. And I realized then that this second opportunity, this healing, wasn't just for me. It served a higher function. I discovered that living was about thriving physically, emotionally, and spiritually, rather than merely getting by. My capacity to connect and heal, I was unable to provide a common explanation for the spiritual dimension. More than I had ever thought possible, I had come to understand that life was about more than just the material world, and this realization began to influence every aspect of my existence. I began to see trends, events, and coincidences as I made my way through this new reality that suggested a more profound, invisible power. The law of attraction began to make sense to me in a way that I had never understood before. I started to realize how ideas actually materialized. I jotted down my ideas, intentions, and images each day. I had faith in the cosmos to lead me, and it did. Los Angeles, San Francisco, or Denver were my three options when it came to moving. However, it wasn't until I nearly ran into a moving truck with the words "Move to Palm Springs" emblazoned on it after running a red light that I realized where they were. I followed the universe's plain message, which was a sign. It took a leap of faith to relocate to Palm Springs without a job. However, it ended up being among the greatest choices I've made in life. I began sharing the lessons I had learned from my near-death experience in my book and giving public speeches about my trip. Even in the face of doubt from others, I always followed my instincts. Many people advised me not to accept the invitation to participate on the TV show Sightings, but I trusted my instincts and did what I felt. I never would have guessed the new chances that resulted from that choice. Of course, there were difficulties: homelessness, financial difficulties, and periods of intense uncertainty. However, I discovered that kind individuals were there to support me even during those difficult moments. I discovered that the universe will provide if you have faith in the process. Opportunities, people, and locations always present themselves when you need them most. I frequently reflect on the lessons I've learned from my near-death experience when I consider the status of the world today. My response to the question of whether we are nearing the end of the world is straightforward. We have always been. The world is continuously changing, but we have a message to convey, one of compassion, love, and kindness. No matter what, that is what we need to concentrate on. Love is always the answer that the world is looking for. I discovered that there are no classifications in the spiritual world that we construct in this life, such as wealth, race, or religion. There is no judgment based on these factors in the afterlife. Love, spirit, and our deeds in life are what count. I realized that Jesus wasn't there to judge me or anybody else when I saw him during my near-death encounter. He was there to mentor us and show us how to love without conditions or restrictions. I felt as though the entire cosmos was encircled by a love that was so profound and expansive at that very instant. There was only unity, neither separation nor division. Jesus was a living example of that fact, demonstrating to me how interconnected we are and how every action we take in life, whether it be a kind deed or a decision, has an impact on the entire. Throughout my life review, I observed how the act of dropping a gum wrapper had a cascading impact. Even the slightest details and the times we don't consider are significant. I now make an effort to live intentionally. I make an effort to make every deed matter. Knowing that my words and deeds have effects, I've grown more conscious of the environment. I didn't always express my love for people before my NDE. Now, though, I try to show my love and gratitude as much as I can. I've discovered that we should never undervalue the gift of love. It's possible that we won't always get the opportunity to express ourselves. I now make it a point to express my affection for everyone in my life, even though I regret not expressing my sister how much I loved her when I had the chance. I make an effort to tackle disagreements and challenges with empathy. I discovered during my life review how frequently miscommunications or unsaid suffering lead to confrontation. I now make an effort to see past other people's remarks or deeds. Knowing that everyone is trying to figure out what's causing the conflict, struggling with something, and occasionally a small act of compassion can make a big difference. I had no belief in anything other than the physical world before to my near-death experience. I was an agnostic. However, everything was different. There is no religion or tradition that can explain what I went through. It encompassed everything of Jesus' teachings on wisdom and love, making it global. The divine is not a judgmental God, as I now realize. The universe is a caring, encouraging place that is always directing us. My perspective on the world has changed. I've learned from the experience that the only truth is love. Though I now understand that the core of all spiritual truth is located in the love that Jesus exhibited, I still respect all spiritual traditions that encourage compassion and love. He demonstrated to me that love, of which we are all a part, is what the divine is all about, rather than laws. Sharing that love with others is our mission here on earth, and by doing so, we will significantly alter humankind. The actual reality of our existence is that we are all interconnected, the cosmos. As I mentioned before, my psychic powers aren't always the same. There are moments when I can see ghosts just as plainly as I can individuals in the real world. At other times, it's more instinctive or intuitive, and I simply know something about a person or circumstance without anyone expressing it. Additionally, I have gotten messages in the form of symbols or even dreams that subsequently make perfect sense. There was a single instance where my skills truly improved my work. I was assisting detectives in an unresolved homicide investigation. I kept seeing pictures of a particular flower, one that initially baffled me with its meaning. However, this information proved to be vital when I shared it with the detectives. In a location not previously identified in the case records, this blossom was permanently inked on the victim's body. They eventually solved the case after re-examining the evidence in light of this small information. It served as a poignant reminder that these skills are not merely a personal talent, rather they are something that may truly benefit others. I initially questioned my skills, particularly in the beginning. It was overpowering. I didn't always know how to handle the information that seemed to be thrown at me. But as time went on, I started to have greater faith in them. I've had so many confirmed encounters that I find it difficult to have any doubts anymore. Nevertheless, I constantly advise others to use discernment. Even if someone claims to be psychic, I don't think they should be taken at face value. Reintegrating into society after my near-death experience was one of the most difficult things I have ever had to accomplish. I came back with a very different viewpoint than everyone else. I had witnessed the opposite side and had a deeper understanding of life and death than anyone who had not gone through it. A lot of people were unable to comprehend or accept what I had experienced. Some family members separated themselves, and I lost friends. I felt so very alone for a long time. It was difficult to endure the time of seclusion, although I ultimately developed coping skills. I had to come to terms with the fact that I was different. I tried to cling to that feeling of calm by leaning into the love I had experienced during my NDE. I eventually came across people who either had comparable experiences to mine or were receptive to them. My lifeline was creating that network of folks who could relate to me or were prepared to listen. Next are manifesting and the law of attraction. It all comes down to matching your desires with your thoughts, beliefs, and behaviors, in my opinion. I have specific goals every morning. I concentrate on imagining what I hope to accomplish or go through. However, I've learned that thinking positively isn't the only way to create. It all comes down to acting when the time is right, staying receptive to chances, and acting with inspiration. For instance, I didn't know where to begin when I made the decision to write a book. However, I made the decision and pictured myself as a writer. Shortly afterward, I was introduced to a literary agency at a party. Opportunities arose, and doors started to open for me too. Never made any plans. However, the secret was to remain receptive and ready to act when such chances presented themselves. However, it hasn't always been simple. As I've previously stated, I have the ability to view both the material and spiritual realms, which can occasionally be overwhelming. Initially, I was seeing spirits everywhere and getting information all the time. It felt like an endless barrage of sensory information when I needed to simply be in the actual world. I had to figure out how to turn it off and learn how to create boundaries. I now consider this gift to be beneficial to both myself and other people, but I take care to maintain my perspective. I also returned from my NDE with a message of compassion and love. However, it can be challenging to maintain that viewpoint in a society that frequently seems to be full with strife and hostility. I watch the news and I face the same difficulties as everyone else. However, my NDE opened my eyes to a wider perspective. I now realize that the surface appearance is frequently only a small portion of the larger picture. I concentrate on the positive traits I observe in others, the minor, daily deeds of kindness, even if they don't always garner media attention. I urge people to cultivate thankfulness when I speak to them about maintaining their optimism. Pay attention to the positive aspects of your life, no matter how minor. Be the change you wish to see in the world as well. Be kind if you want more kindness. Be loving if you desire more love. It's powerful, despite being straightforward. It changes the energy within you as well as around you. We all have a purpose, in my opinion, and finding it frequently requires focusing on your innermost desires and innate abilities. Focus on the things that make you happy and the skills you possess by nature. Our greatest struggles might occasionally serve as a catalyst for discovering our actual purpose. For instance, my NDE inspired me to share my experience and assist others. The secret to following your heart is paying attention to your gut and having the courage to take chances. Since my NDE, my perspective on death has drastically changed. I'm not afraid of it anymore. I consider it to be a transition as opposed to a conclusion. I cherish every second of this life, every lesson, yet I've come to realize that dying is nothing to be feared. I could never have predicted what would be waiting for us on the other side in my past life. My life has changed as a result of this realization. I make an effort to live in the present and enjoy every second. I no longer take anything for granted. I prioritize education, love, and helping people. Naturally, I'm not flawless. I still have difficulties and make mistakes. However, I make an effort to view every day as a gift and a chance for development. I've achieved a lot since my NDE, including becoming a paranormal investigator, lecturer, and author. However, I feel like I'm only beginning. I wish to spread the word about love and interdependence that I returned with. In addition to writing another book, I'm looking into new technological approaches to reach a wider audience. Additionally, the nexus between science and spirituality piques my curiosity, and I hope to collaborate with scholars in those fields. Lastly, if I could give you one more bit of advice, it would be to never forget how much you are loved. You belong to something far bigger than yourself. Follow your heart and live a genuine life without fear. Treat people and yourself with kindness. Additionally, never undervalue the impact that one act of kindness or love may have on the world. It may change it in ways you can't even imagine.